Hey everyone, this is Zach with 8020 Media, here today with a video on the BMW M3 versus M4. Cutting right to the chase in this video, really the BMW M4 is just a coupe version of the M3, so the BMW M3 is a 4-door sedan, whereas the M4 is a 2-door coupe, and that's really the biggest single difference between the BMW M3 and M4 models. Could truly just end the video there, but of course with the difference in a coupe and a sedan, there are some natural differences between these two cars, so let's jump in and discuss some of the differences and similarities between the BMW M3 and M4 and discuss which one is better, if either one is better than the other. Ultimately, the BMW M4 is really the same thing as the M3, and it all just boiled down to essentially a marketing, branding, and badging change on BMW's end. So if we factor in and look back a couple generations of the BMW M3 and M4, and even to before when it was just badged as the BMW M3, looking back to the E90 generation, we had the E90 M3 sedan and the E92 M3 coupe, and so those cars were virtually the same exact cars, both even badged as the M3. One was simply the sedan, the E90, while the E92 was the coupe. So moving on to 2015, when BMW released the newest versions of the M3, they decided to go ahead and simply rebadge the coupe versions as the M4 rather than the M3, and so then we were left with the F80 M3 and the F82 M4, and then the same thing for the newest M3s and M4s that came out in 2021. We have the G80 M3 sedan and then the G82 M4 coupe. So really just a badging and marketing change on BMW's end to change the coupe models to the 4 Series, whereas the sedans remained as the BMW 3 Series. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump in and discuss some of the similarities between the M3 and M4. These two cars share the same exact engine, the same transmissions, all the same drivetrain. They have the same suspension, the same brakes, the same wheels, tires. Just about the entire car is exactly the same, minus the difference of the design in the M3 being a sedan and the M4 being a coupe. So with that then, what are the differences between the M3 versus the BMW M4? And is one of the cars truly better than the other option? Really, the differences between the M3 and the M4 simply boil down to standard differences between any coupe or any sedan on the roads. Jumping into a couple of the specific differences between the BMW M3 and M4, the M3 actually has wider rear fender flares, which in my opinion look a lot more aggressive and look a lot better on the BMW M3 compared to the M4. The reason for that is the standard 3 Series actually has a thinner rear base than the 4 Series does. So when BMW built the M3 and the M4, that means that the 3 Series rear end had to be extended to match that of the BMW M4. And so ultimately that just came down to BMW essentially flaring the rear fenders to give it that wider, more aggressive stance in the rear. And those fender flares are noticeable, and again, just something that I think look a lot more aggressive. Now it might come down to personal preferences and some may disagree. Now others will naturally think and agree that a coupe looks like a sportier, kind of more aggressive, performance-oriented car than the sedan, so there is of course that in the BMW M4's favor. Another thing with the BMW M3, of course, with it being a sedan, you're going to have the 4 doors. It's going to be easier to access the rear seats. You're going to have more headroom in the rear seats, more leg room, and the M3 also offers more trunk space. So when it comes down to it, the M3 is really just the more practical, spacious car, especially if you have a family or frequently drive around with a number of passengers. Obviously, life is going to be a lot simpler having those extra doors and having the extra space in the rear of the vehicle. Moving on to the BMW M4 and some differences there. Now, a lot of people think, again, a coupe is going to be a lot more performance-oriented, a lot smaller, lighter, etc. That really isn't the case with the BMW M4. The main difference is that the M4 does have a shorter, sleeker roofline, which does result in the M4 being about 1.5 inches shorter than the M3, and that 1.5 inch difference in height applies to both generations of the M3 versus M4. Both the F80 and F82 and G80 and G82 are separated by about 1.5 inches height-wise. Now you might think that's really going to help the center of gravity and give a decent advantage to the BMW M4. However, that isn't the case because really the shorter height just boils down to the sleeker roofline on the BMW M4. So that's really not going to change the center of gravity at all because both cars do still have the same exact ride height, and all of the heaviest components, the engine, transmission, seats, really all of the interior stuff is going to be just about the same height and same positioning. So ultimately, the center of gravity between the M3 and M4 is going to be nearly identical, despite the fact that the M4 is a little bit shorter. That should give it a slight aerodynamic advantage to the M4 at higher speeds, something that's not really noticeable or not anything that's going to affect performance to a large degree. Especially at lower speeds, this would be something that would more so maybe be a slightly bigger advantage to the M4 once you start talking about speeds in excess of 150 miles an hour or so. But before that, there really isn't going to be any significant difference, but it's still a slight advantage to the M4, even if it's just a very slight advantage. And then when it comes to weight, the BMW M4 does weigh about 10 pounds less than the M3, and that really holds true for all generations of the M3 versus M4. The coupes have always had a roughly 10-pound weight advantage. Now, that is a very small difference. It's not going to be noticeable at all, and really the more important factor is going to be how the car is optioned out. Again, if you have the same exact options and features, they're both spec'd out exactly the same, the M4 is going to be 10 pounds lighter. However, if you compare an M3 with a manual transmission to an M4 with an automatic transmission, the M3 is actually going to be the lighter car in that situation. And again, ultimately, 10 pounds in the first place really isn't going to be enough to affect performance at all. Both of these cars do have the same quarter-mile times, the same 0 to 60 times, and really offer the same exact track times. So ultimately, there isn't really a single notable performance difference between the M3 and M4. Again, these are basically the exact same cars. The M4 is simply an M3 with an M4 badge on it because it's a coupe instead of a sedan. So if you are in the market for an M3 or an M4, it really just comes down to personal preference, what you like more in terms of looks, design, practicality, so on and so forth. But we wouldn't recommend basing any decisions off performance or just the fact that one's a coupe or a sedan and how that may affect performance. Again, a lot of people assume just because it's a coupe, it's going to be faster, lighter, more performance oriented. However, that is not the case when it comes to the BMW M3 versus M4. So really the biggest difference is just going to come down to looks. Obviously the M3 and the M4 look slightly different because of the coupe versus sedan differentiation. And again, the M3 does have those slightly wider fender flares, so I've always preferred the looks of the M3 sedans over the M4 coupes. But I know a lot of people go the other way and disagree with that and think that the lower, sleeker design of the M4 looks better. So again, just personal preference there. And then of course there's practicality. If you really don't need the extra doors, there might not be any reason to go for the M3 instead of the M4. However, if you have a family, kids, or frequently drive around with friends or family otherwise, then there certainly is a lot of convenience for having the extra 2 doors for when you do need them, especially considering you aren't really sacrificing anything like performance in the process. That really is all there is between the BMW M3 versus M4. Virtually the same exact cars, and which one is better really just boils down to personal preference and what you're looking for in a BMW M car. That said, that wraps up our video for today, guys. If you appreciated the content, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and check out the description below for more. Thanks, everyone.